If you are not from Houston or Texas, welcome. Super excited to have everybody here. The entire CS4CA squad coming in from London. These guys are amazing. They put on an amazing show. I love the asset owner to vendor relationship numbers. This is a lot of critical thinking. There's a lot of critical thinking that happens at these type of shows, and we're very excited about covering a lot of those things today. Question, does anybody have the little clicker? Maybe you have it? May I test to see if it works? Oh, that's a clicker. Oh, okay. Well, that's a USB. Here, keep that. Did I pass? Did I pass? Hey, look, I can't download anything on my computer. My CISO just locks it down for me. Listen, my name is Ted. I am super excited to be here. I like walking around a little bit. I want to have a conversation with you today. And more than anything, we need to turn this off. How about that? More than anything today, I want to just invoke some curiosity. And I'm going to do that by telling you a little bit about my personal journey through the risk management space. We've got 40 minutes. I'm going to put a little alarm so that I don't go too long. And I'm super excited to take your questions. Do we have time for questions at the end? Is that not allowed? At the end of it, okay. Great. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. Some of you may know me. If so, great to see you. Some of you don't. Look, I'm from Houston. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up, so my dad sent me to the United States Military Academy at West Point. I turned out okay. I studied economics there. Why? Because I love taking... We've got to figure out this mic. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1. It's number HH3. Test 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Okay, now I feel like I can do this. So I studied economics, then I got into the Army. I'm a veteran from Iraq, a lot there. When I got out, I figured, man, I know a lot about risk management. Why don't I join a root cause failure analysis team? My job, working for Bureau Veritas and in turn ExxonMobil, was that when a tool failed downhole during drilling, it would cost millions and millions of dollars. They sent me in as part of like a reconnaissance squad to go figure out what happened wrong. What do you think the result of that was? The result was somebody didn't follow a process, or a process needs to be improved. So what did that lead me to? Shell called me while I was in the North Slope of Alaska and said, hey, you want to jump on board? And I said, absolutely. We're going to talk about the things that I did in my journey that I continue to build upon, right? When I was at Shell, I would go and audit facilities to a host of different standards, okay? And there was a real turning point that I'll cover in a moment about my overall career and where I wanted to add value. But I've spent a lot of time auditing and assessing facilities, right? I'm a fifth generation entrepreneur. I love owning businesses. I love building teams. Those great teams build great companies. And right now, I'm the leader of SecurityGate.io. You can learn more about that company if you're interested. And I also thought it would be interesting for you to understand kind of who is this guy standing in front of you, right? Like what is interesting about me that you may not see from an average person? And that is I'm a budding race team owner, right? So I have a vision, I have a goal that I'm going to own a NASCAR team in under 5 years. How in the world does that apply to risk management? Well, I'll tell you. When you're going 170 miles an hour down the backstretch of Texas Motor Speedway, and then you have to slam on your brakes, you have somebody else coming into you, the element of risk management and control become very important, okay? And so I've spent my entire past 5 years pushing the limits of cars, the people I'm around, myself, and my goal is to help try and push this organization to do some critical thinking about, yes, I have limited resources, how do I get the most out of that? What I'm trying to tell you is that risk management to me is not a job. Risk management to me is a way of life. And I am constantly looking at ways to implement mitigating and compensating controls given the resources and the landscape that we operate in. So my evolution, like why would I listen to this guy? Like what in the world has this guy been doing that I can learn something from? Remember that root cause failure analysis? That was one tool. I would spend 3 to 4 days on site. I would figure out that tool, why it broke, who were the people that were responsible for that, do a little bit of an audit. That transitioned into one site. Let's go audit this to a NIST CSF. Let's go audit this to an ISO 27000. Got a little better at that. Then it said, well, let's go assess multiple sites. Now I'm having to evaluate risk scores, control status across a host of different facilities. And then they said, well, why don't you start managing all the implementation of these controls? And that's where my life really took a different turn. Because I would go to a facility in Brazil, And then I would come back a year later after the best audit that I could dream of, all these action plans that I put together. And did anybody ever remediate anything? So what does that do to a man, right? I decided I got to do better. So I ended up killing that idea, started a couple different companies, and now I built a software solution that I wish that I had had when I was at Shell. And so my evolution from one site to building systems is what I'm going to call from today to kind of organize our overall discussion. To do that, I got to give you an overview of the overall macro landscape, right? So we all know critical infrastructure sectors. There's 16 of them. Some people sometimes feel that they're the bottom of the 16, right? Some of you are probably undoubtedly from some of these spaces, right? If you don't know a lot about this, I'm sure a lot of the different vendors and folks can tell you outside, but there are uniqueness. There are different aspects of every single one of these. And what makes it even more challenging is, I was talking to a CISO about 5 minutes prior to this. Do you know how interconnected some of them are? I mean, you can't drill without water. You can't get goods to chemical without transportation, right? So we're totally interconnected. And what makes our lives really challenging and the landscape for CISOs and OT directors that you have to manage is, how do I make my budget request, how do I make my world of control closure valuable to people that don't understand this, okay? I did some research. 71% of enterprise control systems budgets are growing year over year. This is 21 to 22 data. I actually went a level deeper, and I thought, well, maybe that's just big companies. Companies, small, medium, and large, are all somewhere around 70% year over year growth. Now, by a show of hands, honestly, who believes budgets will continue to increase in size and scope over the next 10 years? Okay, maybe 10%. I got one for you. What is that? I am not a political guy. I am not a fearmonger. That's not what I world. But we live in a different world. And my job today is to impart upon you the things that I tell my own team and the things that I help fellow leaders in this space, CISOs and OT directors, when they brief their boards, because this matters. I personally hypothesize that we will see a flat line of budgets in the OT critical infrastructure space. Not because we decrease our belief system of the importance of such controls, but because the pressure on pricing, the pressure on the goods sold, the macroeconomic costs are going to pull down our entire operational expenditure across all of our critical infrastructures. And so the CEO is like, how much does it cost? Why do you need it? Right? Those are real statements, okay? Look at what happened since 2008. Okay, when we had COVID happen, massive amount of wealth went to more wealthy people. Again, I'm not political, but I ask you one question. Where did all that money go? It went into tech companies. It went into private equity companies. Interest rates since 2005. The cost of borrowing money in the past 10 years has been historically low. So investment bankers are investing in different places. So what did that do to the product landscape that you're operating in, ladies and gentlemen? And what happens when tech companies don't hit their numbers? If you take anything from my presentation, do it that I'm a CEO of a product company, and I'm going to tell you the hardcore truth that nobody else will tell you, is that everybody missed their numbers in Q4. So what does that do to a business? There's only 3 ways to grow a business. Get more clients, charge them more, or sell them more stuff. When tech companies have to do layoffs because they miss their numbers because of whatever, do you think that they are going to double down and triple down and quadruple down on new products with an unknown cost of acquisition and ROI? Or are they going to go back to what they know best? My gut tells me everybody in that other room over there is going to be selling you 1 or 2 products in the next 24 months. That's an important thing to understand when you go to market to get your products. So overall, your challenges are, you have, as a security and risk management leader, as an OT director, as a CISO, you got limited resources. Time, people, money. Those are the 3 ways that I categorize resources. Number 2, all of these new tech companies, all the products you can buy, all the fancy stuff, you've got more options than you've ever had. You've got to be thinking about the health of the company that you're operating in. And number 3, you got to increase scrutiny from non-technical players. Okay? A couple supporting elements of that is all about the business of cyber. Because that landscape is where you live, okay, it's not just about getting budgets, it's about actually creating a legacy of security. Because of that, The business of cyber is what we are going to focus on. Because traditionally, I'm going to buy a security solution because I know the threat's there. Threats continue to evolve. I need more security solutions. There will come a time in the future, if it already isn't happening, at every one of your companies, where someone in a leadership position is going to ask you either directly or indirectly, what is the business angle of this cybersecurity spend? So just a couple supporting points to the previous colors that I did, right? So resources, nearly half of cyber people are going to be switching out of cyber in the next 5 years, right? And they're going to do it because of work-related stressors, work-life balance, maybe they want to come back into the office, maybe they didn't get the budget they wanted, they couldn't kind of create that value. There is a significant number of people who are going to change their jobs out, and we already have a brain drain in cybersecurity. So if you believe that we're going to just there's this massive flux of human beings, it's probably not going to happen. And who here wants to teach ChatGPT how to implement network segmentation? Anybody? No takers? No takers? Cool stuff. I'm very interested. Scared out of my mind, and I already told my staff that. I said, figure out a way to implement it because I'm not going to leave it behind, but we are not going to be doing this overnight, okay? We are not going to get more people. Number 2, 80% of organizations are pursuing a vendor consolidation strategy. Got a lot of people with shelfware, got a lot of platforms that are getting into an integrated capacity. They're looking at more at APIs. And so there is a lot of pressure on the confusion side of the house when it comes to controls closure. What vendor strategy am I going to have? And then finally, from a scrutiny perspective, the board, non-technical, over 90% of SRM leaders are reporting to the board at least annually. I think the latter part of this presentation was about how do you get these folks kind of, maybe not on your team, but at least get them to neutral so that you can do your job. These are the supporting elements of why the business of cyber is so important right now, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to cover 3 things, and they're going to correlate back to what we just talked. So when it comes to the actual blue boxes we're going to talk about, we're going to about connecting cyber investments to a business outcome. Okay, we're going to cover 3 or 4 slides there. The second is understanding what the CEO wants. Right? I've got a unique vantage point. I work with other leaders in the space. The vantage point from these folks is very different. We're going to talk about how to tap into that. And then finally, I put these kind of on LinkedIn. I'll give you a little hint. And about 9 people hit me up and said, hey, originally the third one was called Plan Your Cybersecurity Roadmap with the End in Mind. And multiple folks said, hey Ted, cybersecurity journey's never over. And I said, you are absolutely right. And I changed it last night. And what I did is I said, let's plan it by milestones. And I've got some unique things to talk about there. Okay? Everybody excited? Interested? We're at like 12 minutes, so we're good on time. So, linking cyber spend to business outcomes. Okay? This is probably 3rd grader level, 5th grader level. This is not utterly complex. Okay? What is complex is if I'm walking in to be the CISO of a drilling company, I better understand what the overall operational expenditure is, the day rates of those rigs, where we're at in our rotation, where we're at with our overall CapEx to improve those drilling rigs, and where are we at in our sales cycle for all the operators. Because coming from the drilling world, every operator, they all follow the exact same standard, right? And they all have the exact same controls that they want implemented with the same timeline, the same reporting structures? Absolutely not. Okay? The oil and gas industry, whether it's mid, down, or upstream, is not as robust with a standard and a cohesion as it could be. Okay? So understanding what deals can I help my company close by making sure that security doesn't hold up that deal. And what we're doing, for folks not in this industry, I'm a drilling contractor. And my job as a CISO is to make sure that the security standards that I have on our rigs aligns with the operator who's going to pay a day rate to use that rig. Okay? And so maybe it's deals closed. If you're in the pipeline industry, maybe it's TSA compliance, right? There's an element that you have to say, I am compliant. I'm not a believer that compliance is a bad thing. I'm a believer that compliance is a bad thing when you don't equally invest in the processes and the people to maintain the compliance and make it a truly fundamental part of your overall strategy. Personally, SOC 2. Anybody ever tried to implement or get a SOC 2 certification? As a software company, we did that. And at the very, very beginning, of my onboarding of the CISO, I said, SOC 2 is important. Use all the various frameworks to get there, but SOC 2 is important because I don't want the rollout of our software to a major asset owner to be held up more than 72 hours by the security questionnaire that they send us. That was the business outcome of our SOC 2, okay? It doesn't matter which framework you use. It doesn't matter what standard you use. You've got to be able to make that little switch. And that little switch is these controls serve a purpose, okay? When you also think about your cyber journey, think about personnel development, right? You may be choosing controls to grow that OT or IT specialist. And as you think about your overall roadmap, how are you incorporating that? Safety, huge. Uptime and downtime, I won't cover too much more. I would love to talk to you about if you have any questions here, because we actually have ROI calculators for each one of these different outcomes. By the way, anybody's in this CSF, if you want to just to hack this real fast, go to the subcategories. There's 108 of them. Every single one of them are written in a way that can easily translate into business outcomes. Super easy thing to do. If you've not developed a business outcome, here's how I would encourage you to think based on what worked for me. What are the generators of value to this business? You can think about that at a facility level. You can think about it at a stock price level. How much do those cost to deliver? Cost of goods, CapEx, operational expenditure, people, time. What are the desired outcomes of those activities, right? And then finally, your real first value add when you're the security leader of a given organization in this space is number 3. Because you've got to do a lot of crosstalk to your engineers. You got to do a ton of crosstalk to the operational players. And you got to say, hey, look, out of all these business outcomes that Johnny said were really important, which of these technology solutions, which one of these processes, which one of these people are really incredibly important? And when you do that effectively, then all you got to do is you start saying, okay, what is blank's prioritization of outcomes? What is blank's resources available? And so then you go to your leadership, hey, look, I understand these are the critical processes. How much time do I have? How much people do I have? How much money do I have? And that leads us, now that you have that business outcome, you've totally changed the conversation. You're not saying, hi, did you know that the threats are increasing by 600,000% every month of, this hacker's doing this and this hacker's doing that? Trust me, board of directors, they don't want to hear about that, right? The CEO doesn't want to hear about that. Not because he or she dismisses it, but because it is an empty ask. And that's what we're trying to avoid as security leaders, because today's landscape, just to call back, today's landscape requires it of us, okay? Heat map, business continuity, business impact analysis. There's 1,000 ways to do this. There's a lot of solutions out there to do it. It is a great non-technical exercise, and trust me, if all these people are engineers, all these people are the business players, and then half these people are IT, and half of them are OT. Find a couple players, put them in a room, do a business impact analysis facility by facility. It will be a painful process, but the outcome, even if it's in its most rudimentary level, will be alignment between different organizations to at a minimum agree what is important and what's less important, okay? So that's kind of flipping back from all of the blue stuff. Now I want to flip to the second section, which is, okay, I figured out business outcomes. We can link to that. What's the CEO want you to know? And I thought long and hard about the one thing that I would say. The technology or process to implement this control should offer a reduction in risk that clearly exceeds the cost of adoption. That doesn't mean that we have to implement encryption and make money off of it. That's not your job, but your job is to say, this is how much I think this control is going to cost year 1, year 2, year 3. And this is the value that we can take to the business. That's not easy to do, but that is what the CEO is expecting you to do. Because guess what? The board of directors is asking the CEO to do it. I'll flip this on it. CEO goes and asks for a $5 million operational expenditure. Last year was 3. He or she's got to stand in front of the board and say, I have confidence with intuition as well as data that the continued investment in this company's X, go-to-market strategy, new product, development into a new area of the world, that there's an ROI for that. Oh, and I'm going to ask for an additional $2 million. Well, is the cost of doing that exceeded by the ROI that we get? And that's where the magic comes, when you start thinking kind of like a CEO, right? So let's understand a little different. I've worked in drilling, I've worked in manufacturing, I've worked in chemical. I actually owned a chemical company before I started SecurityGate, and I'm going to do a case study in a minute that helps articulate that you've got an opportunity to understand your business. And every single one of these value drivers is very different for all of us, okay? So I chose a couple icons from our critical infrastructure space. When you understand the company's business, you will be able to adjust your cyber controls investment accordingly, okay? So let's dive in a little bit deeper. When I think about my journey where I was maybe 10 years ago, thinking about investing in security controls for a company in the chemical space, I was just thinking about what is the minimum that I have to do to keep my business up and running. I didn't really think about growth. I didn't think about digital transformation. I wasn't thinking as much about, alignment and connectivity. I surely wasn't thinking about third-party suppliers, right? Okay, but what happens when we start asking questions like this? What's the correlation between labor costs and product costs for my chemicals that I'm making? What's the correlation between labor costs and product costs for asset inventory implementation? What's the value driver for network segmentation or an additional security person? Because if you're not thinking about the long-term and short-term implementation and labor costs to support more vulnerabilities, more understanding of your environment, okay, more incident response exercises, if you're not thinking about what it takes to actually implement and run, then what are you going to do? You're just going to be throwing vulnerabilities over the fence. And that's where we see a lot of the drop-off with motivation with a lot of the different CISOs today, is that there's tons of data flow, but it is inversely correlated with improvement. Let me say that again. The correlation between more data coming from systems does not always equal a positive correlation in your overall improvement. And whose job is that? Is it the CEOs? Is it the business owners? This is where we really start challenging ourselves. Once you really get a handle on your overall costs and how you're thinking about it, this is what we start asking ourselves. If we reduce working capital in our product costs, could we invest in other things? Very, very basic scenario. We got an incident response exercise. We're going to implement some encryption. We're going to implement some sort of, blocking and tackling hardware. Those are the three things that we're going to do. Now we say, I'm going to need labor costs on all of these, across all of them. And then I'm still going to keep 20% of my roadmap open. Why? Because we don't know if we're going to have some sort of attack that we have to manage. We don't know if we're going to have some new ask. And this is where people sort of mess up in the early stages of their overall roadmap. So getting a little bit deeper into what the CEO wants you to know, this is a little accelerated. Manufacturing has a very different way that it looks at value add than drilling. So in a manufacturing, you have a beginning balance. You have all these new transfers in for other chemicals or manufacturing parts or items from other places. The sum of those equals a new product. And then the number of those products that you move out is basically your transfers out. This is how mathematics and P&L work in that world. And if we understand that, then we can speak that language to the CFO. We can speak that language to the CEO. Same thing goes for drilling. You got non-productive time. You got a specific investment costs that you have to make on your rig specific to the operator, right? And then wastewater, you actually have to incorporate population consumption, amortization. You have to actually calculate in a fluctuating government subsidy. So just think about how different each of these different sectors creates value and then mathematically achieves value that they can continue to operate. When we as security and risk management leaders sit in that environment, the duty falls upon our shoulders to translate cyber risk, cyber controls, all of those investment to this. Because who's more likely? You knock on the CFO and the CEO's door and tell them how you correlate your costs to them? Or they walk down to your office and say, well, listen, I think these are the 7 cyber controls we need. I've mapped them to the board of directors. That's not going to happen, guys. So growth that we as an ecosystem of SRM leaders must acknowledge and invest in becoming better at is understanding calculations that we may not be really comfortable with. I leave that there. Every single sector, I've done a lot of work in calculating ROI and how do you get cyber budget. If you want access to it, I'll give it to you. And just come see me at the end of the show. I would be happy to share that with you. So let's go over a case study. This enterprise, which is a manufacturing sector, chemical sector, has distributed facilities all over the US, each with a varying degree of value in the business outcome. The CISO understands those business drivers well enough to actually map control closures and resulting resources across these facilities. A lot of people think that, like, okay, it's a chemical company. I've got a facility and we're going to put a lot of controls in place. Here's what most people don't understand. You start with a beginning balance of a certain number of products or chemicals in one place, okay? But there are probably 3 to 4x the number of facilities that create a unique product that is necessary to the overall output. So you got product A, and then you need product B, C, D, E, and F to make product A into product G. When you get product G, which is an ending balance, that's when you create value, that's when you sell it. So real quick, who thinks that getting the product to the white facilities from the little facilities should be one of the major controls that we take a look at, because you can't make the purple product without the other products. Fair enough? Right? So when you start thinking about third-party risk management, I'm talking about vendors visiting my facilities, I'm thinking about the trucking software, I'm thinking about overall force majeure of those facilities. I can tell you what the supply managers are thinking about. A good supply manager goes to that, transfers in, and if they have a single source supplier, it goes straight to the top on the importance. And a good supply manager is going to create backup alternatives here. When I was in the chemical space, we had this one product, it was called isocyanate. And we actually had insurance contracts that we could pull if we couldn't make those, because it was the only place, and there was a place called Geismar, Louisiana with BASF. It's the only place in the United States I could get it. That was a limiting factor. So I put all my resources in making sure that truck always got there on time. And I actually extended the hours of operation of my business just so I could always receive it. It's an example. Back to the basics. As a CISO, if you understand your business value and the drivers of that, the CISO has that responsibility to say, these are where we need to place our efforts. And it all goes back to controls. Okay? So when you start getting a little bit better at understanding this, you've got all your controls in place. Now you're crunching down on them. Okay? What if you could reduce cyber spending on 20% annually? Any ideas on how you can do that? Same control closures. I'm going to give you guys a secret. If the product companies in the other room mostly miss their numbers in Q4, what incentive do they have to lock down deals in Q1 and Q2? I guarantee you, I could come to your office and I could get every single one of your vendors to drop their prices by a minimum of 20% annually. You want to know how to do it? Drive immense transparency to your needs, connect it to a business value, and incentivize them to lower their price. You have an incident response exercise you got to do in December. You already know it. It's already resourced. You got 80K. We could get it for 50, because you go straight to the boss and you say, look, I've got to get this done. This is what my parameters are. This is exactly what I want done. But I'm going to give you fidelity of a closed deal in December today. The value is you don't have to speak to that vendor all year long. In fact, you can delete the communication with sister vendors competing for the same product. They are going to be able to go to a guy like me and say, hey, we just closed XY company. They don't even need the service for 6 months. What am I going to do? I'm going to prioritize that company to the very top of the list. That means I go to customer experience. That means I go to product. That means I go to tech. And I have the fidelity of being able to grow that business unit faster. We as a collective group have a choice in how we choose select vendors and implement them. So what the CEO wants you to know is how to do this. You can't do this unless you have immense fidelity in what you want to build, how you want to roll it out, and then you have to empower your team to go and execute on that. Okay? Finally, this is the one I like. If this is interesting to you, come talk to me. Why can't you go to a product company and say, look, all I care about is improvement, and I'll pay you when it improves. Try that one for size. Remember, your job is to select controls to go and fix things. This is where I'm focused personally, is that I believe that we are spending way too much as a collective body of leaders on cyber sales, cyber marketing, y'all are the experts. You already know how to do this. Putting yourself in a position where you can negotiate like this requires alignment of a couple different things. First is you got to have your business outcomes set. 2, you've got to have the support of your company. And 3, you got to actually be willing to take a couple risks. So you really have to drive transparency to that process. 2 different companies, 2 different resulting sizzle lives, okay? Environment and culture of your company, of your team, of your family, of your home drives belief systems. Those belief systems will drive your thoughts. Those thoughts drive your actions. Those actions drive results. If you are a company that holds the purse strings real tight, doesn't delegate anything, wants to try to solve the world's cyber problems in 1 year, you're going to be in company B. Projects don't get implemented. Because the projects don't get implemented, you got people that are upset on your staff. Then they churn out. Now you got to go back to Indeed. Indeed has like 38 people from Jack in the Box saying that they know how to do network segmentation. People are our number one investment as security leaders. Because without people, nothing gets implemented. They're the most expensive. They cost the most money, they cost the most time, and for good reason, because ChatGPT cannot take over what we do. There's not more people coming in, so we've got to take care of the ones that we have. Now look at company A. This leader empowers the team. Hey guys, here are the 7 controls that we're going to implement. You have $733,000. I want you to stay at 90%. I want 90% of that budget spent. Here's the date you would add it. The outcome I'm looking for is that at this date, and this date, I'm going to report to the board these 5 things. So every day you come to work, you're delivering on something of these 5 things. Here's what our risks are. Here's what this is. You have X amount of time. You're going to go work on that one. You're going to work on this one. You're going to work on this one. Why did I choose those? Because this guy is a planner, and he is going to implement the best rollout of asset inventory ever imaginable. This guy's an innovative guy. He's going to be our incident response player. And he works great with other people. So we're going to connect him with everyone. And you let him loose. What's the worst thing that can happen? They fail? Great. Call the Jack in the Box guy. Operate on a 2-year plan. Lower turnover. Higher engagement. Procurement and CFO are your best friends. I know a CISO, it's a personal friend. He has got procurement doing anything that he needs because he spent months and years developing that relationship, and the procurement team understands exactly what he's trying to do. The alternative is, well, you know, I don't really understand the procurement process because it's a different body of the group. Little things that help me in my journey, right? And perfect word to transition to the next slide. That's I-10. That's actually not I-10. I-10, it would be beautiful if it was. Anybody going to San Antonio recently? I mean, it is the horrible drive, okay? It is so bad. It used to take 2.5 hours. Now it takes 5. If it is I-10 and we got to get to El Paso, are we going to plan the trip on 1 tank of gas and a couple powdered donuts? No. We're going to plan to get to San Antonio first. No, if we were trying to get to California, did I mess this up? You're going to get to El Paso. Milestones, guys. First we're going to get to San Antonio, then we're going to get to El Paso, then we're going to get somewhere in Arizona. That is an important aspect, and it's where I want to spend the next 7 to 8 minutes as we close up, okay? Your company's journey is your legacy. Whether you signed up to be that legacy or not, when you come on as the security leader, no matter where you are in the in the hierarchy, is what you leave behind is all that matters. Because somebody else is going to pick up the ball and run with it, whether you get promoted or you move on. And so break it up into milestones. There is a methodology that I implemented back in 2019. My team uses this. My product people use this. My sales people use this. If you're in the prepare phase, you're planning your journey. You're getting your budget. You're talking to stakeholders. You're choosing a framework. There's 16 different things you do in this phase. When you get to baseline, you've conducted your first assessment. You know what the business value drivers are, and you start to build a roadmap of improvement. But you probably are doing it for 1 or 2 facilities. After you do that for a couple years, you got all this data flowing in on all my different facilities. You understand what controls are in place. You're overwhelmed, right? You're overwhelmed, you got too much data, not enough people, and you're at this inflection point in your cybersecurity journey where automation has to start to kick in. This is when we accelerate. This is when you have, well, I have NIST CSF, but I actually changed 60% of the questions to match my own business context. Perfect, beautiful, you're in the accelerate phase. We're gonna connect things. And then finally, incorporate is when there are enough data loops coming from all the different business units that you can preemptively make decisions about where your next cyber investment is going to go. Now this is where I like to go. So I've mapped it all out. This is by asset owners. We have tons of data to support this. 2019 to 2020. A lot of people in baseline phase. A lot of people doing their initial assessments. At this time, we had a lot of product companies coming out with new solutions. We also had a lot of new things coming down from compliance standards and mandates. New updates to different frameworks were being built. What do you think it did 21 to 22? Rhetorical question. The total addressable market of cybersecurity buyers went up. Budgets went up. More people were hired. More people said, we need to invest more in cybersecurity. So as a result, product companies like me, we say, man, there's a lot more people out there. But do they come in at baseline and accelerate if they're new buyers? No. They come in at prepare. Now here's what most people think they are. Most people think they're at the incorporate phase. Okay? Just like in the race car world, people tell me, hey man, did you put a supercharger on there? What are you doing, like 1,000 horsepower? It's like, no, I invested in more tires, more brakes, better harnesses. I'm serious, man. Everybody wants to go fast, but nobody wants to slow down. Nobody wants to turn well. The fundamentals are so important to get from accelerate to incorporate. And that's why most people, they want to connect everything. That's what IT people do. Well, we're going to connect to 74 different applications. It's not easy to get to that incorporate phase. What happened now, where we see the market go, is we continue to see more people coming in the early phases. We see prepare phase folks moving to baseline. We see baseline folks moving to accelerate. And we continue to see a drop-off and incorporate. But the drop-off, in my estimate, is going to be harder. And it's going to be a trench that falls off. Why? Because a lot of the people that have been investing in super expensive solutions over the course of the last 2 or 3 years are starting to say, dude, what, do we really need this? Because we haven't done an incident response exercise. I'm low on my people. They're not trained. There's a lot of challenges right now that really expensive OT solutions are having with churn. With customers saying, I'm going to bow out. This is just an overview. As you start to think about your milestones, I'm just picking NIST CSF because it's, from our data points, about 73% of the market uses it. There's an updated version coming out. There's a new domain coming out called Govern. But you've got 5 domains. You've got about 28 different categories. Your subcategories are your friends. Okay? Your subcategories map to the category, and so what you can see there, organization role in the supply chain is defined and communicated. That's a business outcome if you turn it into it. You can edit this, you can map this, you can grow this. What is important for your team, what will keep you feeling, looking, and acting younger, is not to overwhelm yourself with the breadth of a humongous assessment if you already know that your resources are going to be limited for implementation and remediation. So when you start an assessment, you should already have an understanding of what your resource allocation is going to be for the next 12 months. And when you do that, I'm not saying you delete these questions. I'm not saying you delete evaluating yourself. What I'm saying is you are going to reverse engineer improvement by specifically listing out what your milestones are going to be for the first 12 months. I love this. I'm going to have a whole team dedicated to doing this and helping CISOs do it on a regular basis. If you're interested, I'll help you understand that more. There's a lot of free resources online to help you learn that. Implementation tiers are another, I think, a gem in the industry, and they're not widely used. You basically, with NIST CSF, have 4 different implementation tiers. Partial means that you're not really connecting a lot of the data points to the other business units. And 4 means that you're super adaptive. You flip this on its side, tier 1, 2, and 3, and 4 can be like prepare, baseline, accelerate, although they're not mapped perfectly. Tiers don't necessarily mean maturity, but they support how you ask yourself, where am I going to place resources, and how am I going to get the organization to match this and to feed it, right? So let me show you real quick. We only got a couple slides left. Case study for a chemical sector. The enterprise had a relatively small team and a small budget, but were really world-class players because they use the implementation tiers to align the business unit to the cyber risk of each entity with an appropriate program to manage them effectively. So similar to what we saw in the other, what this business did is it said, look, I've got 30 plus facilities, 10 of them are really low impact, they're IT focused, they're offices. I've got 25 that are supply facilities or low impact chem sites. Maybe these are your smaller rigs, the smaller day rate contracted rigs. And then I got 8 big money makers. Those big 8 money makers need all of our help. Now, the question at the OT director or CISO level is, am I going to peanut butter control closure across all of these effectively? Am I going to focus on my top money makers first during this first phase of my journey and then move to the others? Am I going to outsource with a managed service some of these? These are the questions that rest on your shoulders, and the answers become clearer when we break up our improvement methodology into milestones. Why would we do that? Because you want to say in 2 or 3 years, we started on a journey to get from 1 to 2, then from 2 to 3. Here's how they were defined, and you walk away a winner. And everyone around you walks away a winner instead of trying to boil the ocean. Ladies and gentlemen, my hope today with this presentation was just to help you understand what worked from my journey. I started doing root cause failure analysis at a tool, moved to one site, moved to a bunch of sites, and my story kind of evolved in a way that I was able to talk to a lot of engineers. I had to present to board of directors. And I only ask for 2 things. One, I hope that I invoke some level of curiosity, and I look forward to shaking your hand if I can be of any service. And number 2, maybe you can take one thing away and go and be a better leader for that cyber person on your team. Or maybe you can go back to the CEO or CFO with one data point. The final thought that I will leave you with is have fun. You are about to be inundated for the next 2 days with amazing people down here in Texas, amazing solutions in the other room, and data is just going to come at you like crazy. And just ask yourself if you want to go back to work on Thursday, totally exhausted and not accomplishing anything. My ask of you is take 1 or 2 things away and go and focus on them deliberately as part of that next milestone. My name is Ted. My team is called SecurityGate, and I really thank you for being here today.